It required merely 4 minutes and 17 seconds for Ben Shapiro to cause Ilhan Omar to rue the moment she accepted a challenge where empirical data outweighed narratives of victimization. For weeks, the CNN special broadcast had been advertised as the future of American political discourse, a policy debate that appeared ideal on paper. The stage was set for Ben Shapiro, the conservative commentator famous for his rapid-fire delivery of hard truths, against Representative Ilhan Omar, the progressive lawmaker recognized for her emotive rhetoric and focus on identity. The network executives at CNN had anticipated a polite exchange of viewpoints and perhaps a few shareable clips that would appease viewers from both political spectrums. However, what transpired was an absolute slaughter, a systematic and methodical dismantling that reduced Omar's arguments to rubble and placed her political future in grave danger. Omar arrived on the platform exuding the assurance of a politician who had spent years sheltered by a compliant press, protected by the armor of identity politics, and insulated from rigorous examination by the progressive elite. She had encountered difficult inquiries in the past, yet she had invariably succeeded in deflecting them with charges of bigotry or by utilizing her status as a victim. Her prepared remarks were centered on personal history, the plight of marginalized groups, and the necessity of prioritizing empathy over cold evidence. Conversely, Shapiro approached the podium armed with a computer, a thick pile of records, and that faintly smirked expression he adopts when he is prepared to school an opponent who is in dire need of instruction. He sported his trademark yarmulke, a visible signal that her attacks on the Jewish people and Israel were attacks on a man who could retaliate with both deep personal conviction and crushing factual accuracy. The moderator, Jake Tapper, appeared visibly anxious, and his apprehension was well-founded as the two combatants delivered their introductory remarks. Omar spoke with great fervor regarding her path as a refugee, her role in representing the disenfranchised, and her commitment to the struggle for equity and justice. It was an effective address, well-rehearsed and designed to pull at the audience's heartstrings while asserting her moral superiority. Then it was Shapiro's turn to speak. "Congresswoman Omar, I thank you for that touching opening presentation, and I value your personal story, but there is a crucial limitation regarding personal stories, which is that they are not synonymous with objective facts. Subjective experience does not supersede hard evidence, emotional reactions do not overrule statistical data, and being insulted does not automatically make you correct. Therefore, let us examine your actual history because I have dedicated the past few weeks to gathering your voting records, your declarations, your financial filings, and your public assertions. I possess inquiries, a significant number of inquiries, and I intend to speak rapidly because I have a multitude of facts to address, and you have a substantial amount of explaining to do." The spectators shifted uncomfortably in their chairs as the smile on Omar's face began to waver ever so slightly. Tapper appeared as though he was already lamenting his decision to accept this moderating duty. The events that followed transformed into the most viewed political confrontation of the decade, not due to its competitiveness, but because it was a comprehensive annihilation supported by years of accumulated receipts. Shapiro wasted no time on pleasantries as he projected a chronological timeline onto the monitor behind him, tapped his keyboard, and began a presentation that resembled a prosecutor reading charges at the speed of an auctioneer. Let us begin with your marital history, specifically in the plural, because the details are more convoluted than a complex film plot and less credible than a comic book storyline. In the year 2002, you entered a religious union with Ahmed Abdi Salin Hersi, which was not recognized by the government, yet you referred to him as your spouse. That is perfectly fine. You raised a family together. which is a wonderful version of the American dream. Shapiro's hands gestured animatedly toward the timeline displayed on the screen. However, in 2009 you entered a legal marriage with Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, and this is the point where the situation becomes intriguing, and by intriguing I mean statistically impossible to justify innocently. Mr. Elmi arrived in the United States on a student visa in 2009, and merely weeks later, he became your husband. That fact alone provokes questions because wedding a U.S. citizen is the most direct route to permanent residency and eventual citizenship. Omar began to interject, but Shapiro continued speaking with increased velocity. Let us proceed, for after marrying Mr. Elmi, you resided at a separate location, not a shared home, but entirely different addresses. Your children were registered for school using Mr. Elmi's address as their primary home, yet you were not actually residing there as you were living with Mr. Hersey. Simultaneously, you maintained joint bank accounts with Mr. Elmi, despite maintaining separate households. He advanced to the subsequent batch of financial records. Then, in 2014 and 2015, while your legal marriage to Mr. Elmi remained in effect, you filed joint tax returns with Mr. Hersey. That is not a situation open to interpretation, Congresswoman, for you are prohibited from filing joint taxes with an individual to whom you are not legally wed. That constitutes tax fraud, and every return you submitted contained a declaration that you were signing under penalty of perjury. You executed at least 2 fraudulent tax documents, which equates to 2 felony charges right there. Shapiro displayed a sequence of immigration records on the large monitor, the light from the data reflecting in his spectacles. Then, in 2017, you finalized your divorce from Mr. Elmi, and in 2018, you legally wed Mr. Hersey, the very man you had been cohabitating with and filing fraudulent taxes with while married to another. All of these factors have resulted in significant public inquiries regarding whether Mr. Elmi is in fact your sibling, a claim that has been widely reported and supported by investigators. You have persistently declined to submit to a DNA test that would conclusively refute this accusation. If the allegation is false, why do you not simply undergo the test and silence the speculation? Unless, of course, the speculation is entirely correct. He pivoted to face her squarely, leaning into the microphone stand. Let me present the statistical reality for the viewers present. The likelihood of this entire sequence, involving the student visa timing, the addresses, the tax filings, the school registrations, and the bank accounts being a harmless coincidence is roughly 0.1%. You would possess a higher probability of winning the jackpot while simultaneously being struck by lightning. These are not merely personal errors, Congresswoman. They represent a pattern of deliberate deceit. Omar's complexion appeared visibly reddened as she clutched the edges of her podium. These are bigoted conspiracy theories propagated by right-wing radicals to invalidate my position in this legislative body, she retorted. Shapiro instantly raised his palm to interrupt her. Cease this immediately, because facts are not bigoted. Documents are not bigoted. And your own signatures on federal paperwork are not bigoted. Mathematics carries no racial bias, and bank statements demonstrating you held joint accounts with Mr. Elmi while living apart are not racist. They are simply records. Immigration files displaying a visa timeline are not bigoted. They are government archives. Tax returns bearing your signature filed jointly with Mr. Hersey while you remained legally bound to Mr. Elmi are not racist. They are proof of federal violations. He leaned in closer, his speech accelerating even further, the words impacting like a drumbeat. What is genuinely bigoted is the presumption that you deserve an exemption from potential federal offenses due to your identity. Equal justice under the law, the maxim inscribed on the Supreme Court, and woven into the Constitution you vowed to support, implies that every person answers for their actions equally. You are not exceptional. You are not immune. And you are not a victim in this situation. You are an elected official who is required to justify why your marital timeline, your residences, your tax filings, your banking history, and your refusal to undergo DNA testing all point toward a triad of immigration fraud, tax evasion, and perjury. Omar attempted to regain her balance, asserting that the accusations regarding her brother had been thoroughly refuted by numerous media outlets. By whom? Shapiro fired back before she could complete her sentence. It was not refuted by you taking a DNA test, nor by you supplying documentation that disproves the family connection. It was not refuted by you providing any justification for the separate residences, the shared accounts, or the fraudulent tax submissions. You have merely proclaimed it debunked, while refusing to offer the specific evidence that would genuinely disprove it. That is not how factual accuracy operates, and that is definitely not how proof functions. You cannot simply utter the word debunked and anticipate that physical evidence will disappear into the ether. Here is what we have established with certainty regardless of the sibling allegations. We know you wed Mr. Elmay weeks following his arrival on a student visa. We know you resided apart. We know your children were registered at his address. We know you held joint funds. And we know you filed erroneous tax returns. These are verified facts that imply federal offenses. So either you are the most unfortunate individual in the history of American politics with the most suspiciously coincidental pattern of conduct, or you committed immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury. Which option is it? The auditorium descended into a profound silence. Omar glanced toward Tapper for assistance, but Tapper was gazing down at his papers as if they might hold an escape plan for them both. Shapiro provided Omar no moment to recuperate, as he displayed a colossal spreadsheet on the monitor, featuring columns of figures and dates and computations that caused the audience's eyes to widen. Let us discuss your daughter's consulting business, or actually, let me amend that statement. Let us discuss your family's money laundering scheme masquerading as a consulting business. I intend to lay this out in the format of a mathematics problem, which I realize may be difficult, but please follow along. He gestured toward the spreadsheet. This is information from Federal Election Commission reports between 2018 and 2020. Showing your campaign paid a firm named the E Street Group $2.7 million. The E Street Group is managed by Tim Minot, who is currently your spouse. Now, let us determine market rates, Shapiro proceeded, advancing to a fresh slide. The services rendered, such as slate mailers and digital strategy consulting, possess established market prices. I contacted 10 political consulting agencies and obtained estimates for the tier of service your campaign obtained. The market standard is roughly $5,000 to $10,000 per election cycle, yet you paid between $75,000 and $150,000 per cycle. That represents 15 times the standard market value. He began computing figures on the screen, the numbers flashing in red. During the time frame in question, the market value for the work provided was approximately $300,000. The sum actually disbursed was $2.7 million. The surplus payment amounts to $2.4 million. That is not a calculation error, nor is it a surcharge for superior service. That is the conversion of campaign assets into personal family revenue by drastically overpaying for services. Shapiro projected comparative statistics from other congressional contests. Let us examine other campaigns, specifically other members of Congress competing in comparable districts with comparable budgets, who paid an average of $180,000 for similar services during the identical time frame. You disbursed $2.7 million. You paid 15 times what your peers paid. The sole variable that explains that surcharge is that the cash was being directed to someone personally associated with you. He clicked through additional data, his tempo quickening. But the situation improves, so let us review the timeline. In April 2018, the initial payment was made to the E Street Group, and in June 2018, you and Mr. Minot were photographed together in Los Angeles while both married to other individuals. In September 2019, you both submitted divorce papers, and from October 2019 through March 2020, payments to the E Street Group surged to over $600,000 in a mere 6 months. In November 2020, you wed Mr. Minot. Shapiro pivoted to Omar, his look one of feigned inquisitiveness. Therefore, the disbursements began when your affair began. They rose drastically as your relationship deepened. They resulted in over $2 million paid above market value, and now you are wed to the recipient of those funds. That is not consulting, Congresswoman. That is the diversion of campaign money for personal gain via a romantic partnership. He displayed documentation regarding FEC grievances. Numerous complaints have been lodged regarding these expenditures. The FEC maintains explicit regulations prohibiting the personal utilization of campaign finances. You are not permitted to use donor capital for private benefit. But if you overpay a consultant who happens to be your romantic partner by $2 million, that is functionally identical. You are simply funneling it through a corporation rather than writing a check to yourself. Shapiro began firing rapidly through the financial breakdown again. Let us simplify the mathematics for the spectators. Total expenditure was $2.7 million. Market value was $300,000, leaving an overpayment of $2.4 million. If we deduce that this surplus benefited you personally via your union with Mr. Minot, that represents $2.4 million in campaign assets converted to private use. That constitutes a breach of federal election statutes and is potentially criminal misappropriation of campaign funds. Omar attempted to vindicate herself by asserting that the FEC had examined the payments. Shapiro cut her off instantaneously. The FEC authorized payments to a consulting agency, but they did not authorize paying 15 times the market standard. That is the deception, for you are exploiting a loophole by overpaying. Technically lawful does not equate to ethical, and it does not alter the reality that you enriched an individual personally linked to you using donor funds. He displayed the donor rolls listing the names of ordinary laborers. These are your contributors, working-class individuals who donated $25, $50, or $100 because they trusted you would advocate for them. Instead, you transferred $2.4 million in excess payments to your romantic partner's business. That is not advocating for the working class. That is exploiting the contributions of workers to enrich yourself and your household. The fundamental truth is that the market rate was $300,000 and you paid $2.7 million. If I had done this, or if any Republican had done this, you would be demanding a prosecution. But when you commit the act, you believe it is permissible. Yet it is corruption, quantifiable, mathematical, provable corruption. And the electorate deserves to know you are enriching your family with their gifts, while claiming to be their defender. Shapiro's demeanor shifted, becoming noticeably more frigid. This matter was personal now, and everyone in the hall could sense the temperature plummet. When he spoke again, his voice possessed a sharpness it had not carried during the earlier exchanges. "Now we arrive at my preferred subject," he stated with profound, cutting sarcasm, Your opinions regarding Jews and Israel. I am Jewish. I wear a yarmulke, and I am pro-Israel. So when you spend years demonstrating you are anti-Semitic, I tend to observe it. Let us review your most significant offenses, for I have arranged them chronologically so we can observe the pattern of intolerance unfold. He projected a collection of archived tweets onto the colossal screens. In November 2012, before you were even a member of Congress, you tweeted that Israel has hypnotized the world, asking Allah to awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Let us analyze that specific phrase, hypnotize the world. That is traditional anti-Semitic imagery suggesting Jewish mind control. It is a trope that dates back hundreds of years, the notion of Jews secretly manipulating global events through hypnosis or influence. You utilize that precise trope regarding the world's solitary Jewish nation. Shapiro advanced to the subsequent tweet before she could reply. In February 2019, you tweeted that it is all about the Benjamins, baby, in response to an inquiry about why U.S. politicians back Israel. That is another vintage anti-Semitic trope regarding Jews utilizing wealth to dominate politics. When reprimanded by members of your own faction, including Jewish Democrats, you released a non-apology and asserted you were unaware it was offensive. But you knew, you absolutely knew. He brought up additional declarations, his speed increasing. You have likened Israel to the Taliban. You have likened Israel to terrorist groups, and you have characterized Israeli security protocols as evil and apartheid. Strangely, you have never employed this terminology regarding China, which maintains actual concentration camps for Uyghurs. You have never used it regarding Iran, which stones women and hangs homosexuals. You have never used it regarding Saudi Arabia, which possesses zero religious liberty. You keep your most severe and vitriolic rhetoric exclusively for the single Jewish state. Shapiro then displayed her actual legislative voting history. You voted against funding for the Iron Dome. That is a strictly defensive system that intercepts rockets launched at Israeli civilians. It does not kill anyone. It merely prevents Israelis from being murdered by terrorists. You voted to deny funding for it. Winter, what conceivable justification could you possess for opposing a defensive apparatus that preserves civilian lives unless you do not wish for those specific civilians to survive? He clicked through additional votes, the data manifesting in rapid succession. You voted against resolutions denouncing BDS, a movement that strives for the complete eradication of Israel as a Jewish nation. You have opposed classifying terrorist groups as terrorists when those groups target Jews. And you have backed UN resolutions condemning Israel while opposing resolutions condemning actual brutal human rights violators. Shapiro then presented statistics from the Anti-Defamation League. The ADL monitors anti-Semitic events. Following your tweet about the Benjamins, anti-Semitic incidents surged by 23% within a 2-week span. Your rhetoric correlates directly with escalations in anti-Semitic assaults. Your words carry ramifications, meaning Jewish Americans encounter violence, and your language encourages the aggressors. He turned to address Omar squarely, his eyes narrowing. You have invoked mind control, you have invoked financial manipulation, and you have minimized terrorism against Jews. We will arrive at your comment regarding some people doing something shortly. You have compared the Jewish nation to the Taliban, and when confronted, you conceal yourself behind the pretext of policy critique. I critique Israeli policy regularly, and I am critical of the Israeli government often, but I do not utilize language from the protocols of the elders of Zion to do so. I do not liken Israel to terrorist organizations while granting actual regimes that support terror a free pass. That is the distinction between valid policy critique and anti-Semitism. Omar attempted to interject, asserting her right to critique the Israeli administration without being branded. Shapiro was practically shouting now, his words arriving even more rapidly. Criticize freely. Criticize settlements. Criticize the administration. Criticize specific mandates. But when you state Jews have hypnotized the globe, that is not policy critique. That is blood libel. When you state it is all about the Benjamins, that is not policy critique. That is invoking the myth of Jewish wealth controlling government. When you liken Israel to the Taliban, while Israel is the sole democracy in the Middle East with equal rights for women and LGBT individuals, that is not policy critique. That is an anti-Semitic fixation. Your own party leadership has admonished you, yet you never genuinely change. You merely become more cautious with your wording while preserving the identical anti-Jewish hostility. You possess a problem with Jews, Congresswoman, and your words prove it. Your votes prove it, and your selective outrage proves it. Shapiro's expression was stern as he brought up audio recordings, video segments, and voting histories. This round was plainly engineered to challenge Omar's foundational allegiance to the nation that had granted her sanctuary. "Let us discuss your oath of office," Shapiro commenced, his voice slicing through the tension. "I have it right here, and it is remarkably concise. It states that I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." Observe, Congresswoman, it does not say support and defend Somalia. So let us discuss where your loyalties genuinely reside. He pressed play on an audio file, and Omar's voice resonated through the room saying, "We are Somali first, Muslim second, American third." Shapiro paused the playback instantly. That is you speaking to a Somali community organization in 2023. You stated you are Somali first and American third. Those are not my words describing your stance. Those are your own words. Your oath declares you will defend the Constitution of the United States, but evidently, that duty arrives in a distant third place after your Somali and religious identities. He displayed her voting records to align her statements with her conduct. Let us observe the pattern. Every time there is a vote concerning the Horn of Africa, you align with Somalia over U.S. allies. Ethiopia, a crucial U.S. partner in counterterrorism versus Somalia, you side with Somalia. Kenya, another U.S. ally versus Somalia in a territorial conflict, you side with Somalia. When the State Department advised sanctions on Somali officials for flagrant corruption, you opposed them. Shapiro clicked through additional information. You opposed military action against Al-Shabaab, a Somali terrorist group responsible for thousands of fatalities. You have consistently voted against classifying them as terrorists. Every single time you align with Somalia against American interests. Shapiro then presented a series of meeting logs. You met with Somali government representatives before official U.S. delegations even arrived. You discussed U.S. policy regarding Somalia before being briefed by our own State Department. You have championed positions perfectly synchronized with the Somali government before those positions were even introduced to you via official channels. How did you know precisely what to advocate for unless you were being briefed by a foreign administration? He then pivoted to campaign finance. Your campaign has accepted substantial contributions from individuals with documented ties to the Somali government. The pattern is unambiguous. Money flows from Somalia-connected individuals to your campaign, and you champion Somalia-aligned positions in exchange. He regarded Omar with a look of piercing intensity. When U.S. interests clash with Somali interests, which do you prioritize? Because your voting record says Somalia, your public declarations of Somali first and American third say Somalia. Your meetings and advocacy say Somalia. Your oath says America, but your behavior says Somalia. That is not representing your constituents. That is functioning as a representative for a foreign government. Omar shook her head, asserting she was representing the interests of her Somali-American constituents. Shapiro interrupted her. They are Americans who happen to possess Somali ancestry, but you represent Americans. When you swear an oath to America, you owe your fidelity to America. You do not get to divide your loyalty. You arrived in America as a refugee. Shapiro continued, his voice escalating. America provided you safety when Somalia could not. America provided you opportunity, education, and the liberty to run for office. And you replied by stating, America comes third. That is not gratitude. It is a betrayal of the confidence placed in you. He motioned to her voting statistics one final time. When U.S. interests and Somali interests diverge, you select Somalia. That is not a coincidence. It is the prioritization of a foreign nation above your oath of office. Imagine any other member of Congress declaring they were another country first and American third. The reaction would be universal condemnation. But when you do it, we are expected to disregard it. No, equal standards apply. Your oath is to America, and your loyalty ought to be to America, period. Shapiro's countenance was grim now. This was the instant everyone in the room had been preparing for. The confrontation regarding the most offensive statement Omar had ever voiced in public office. Let us discuss September 11, 2001, Shapiro began, his voice dropping to a low, intense frequency. The worst terrorist attack in American history. The day that altered everything. Most Americans recall exactly where they were. I was 13 years old, and I remember nearly 3,000 Americans murdered by 19 al-Qaeda terrorists. 4 airplanes hijacked, 2 towers collapsed, the Pentagon attacked, and heroes in Pennsylvania halting a 4th strike. It is seared into our collective memory. But you, Congresswoman, have described it differently. He clicked his laptop and a video clip occupied the screen. It was Omar speaking at a CARE event, her voice reverberating through the speakers, saying CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Shapiro paused the video immediately. Some people did something. That is how you described September 11th, simply that some people did something. Let us analyze that phrase word by word. Some people, not 19 al-Qaeda terrorists, not specific monsters with names and faces who chose evil, just some people as if they were a random sampling of humanity. He clicked through more of her public declarations, a side-by-side comparison appearing on the monitors. Let us compare how you describe other tragedies. The Christchurch mosque shooting. You called it terrorism rooted in white supremacy and spoke about the massacre of 50 innocent Muslims. Specific, detailed, passionate. The El Paso shooting. You called it white nationalist terrorism and a racist attack targeting Latinos. Again, specific perpetrators, specific victims, specific evil. Shapiro's hands were moving rapidly now. Regarding George Floyd, you spoke for hours with detailed descriptions of injustice, racism, specific officers, and specific actions. You are capable of specificity when it suits your narrative. But for the worst terrorist attack in American history, it is just some people did something. Not al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked planes and murdered 2,977 Americans. Not 19 jihadists committed mass murder. Just some people did something, as if they littered or cut in line or were mildly rude. I possess statements here from first responders, firefighters who were there, police officers who ran toward the towers, and paramedics who treated victims. They heard your comment. Do you want to know how they reacted? They said it felt like being stabbed again, like their sacrifice was being minimized, like the worst day of their lives was being reduced to a footnote. Shapiro then displayed letters from 9/11 families. These are widows, children who lost parents, parents who lost children. One woman wrote that she watched her husband die on live television, not some people doing something. No, terrorists murdered him. Say their names, honor the victims by naming the evil. But you did not say their names, Ilhan. You did not describe what they did. You minimized it, and you did it at an event for CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. That is an organization named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorism financing trial in American history. An organization with multiple officials convicted of terrorism-related charges. You chose to speak at their event, Shapiro continued, his voice rising, where you minimized 9/11 while defending CARE's founding. 19 al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 planes and murdered nearly 3,000 people. That is not some people doing something. That is specific evil. You describe white supremacist attacks with passionate specificity, but when the perpetrators are Muslim terrorists, you use passive, vague language. Why? Because naming them and their ideology would complicate your politics. So you minimize, you reduce mass murder to a something, and then immediately pivot to how Muslims were the real victims because they faced scrutiny afterward. Nearly 3,000 people died. Families are still grieving, and your takeaway is that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. That is not empathy, Congresswoman. It is moral bankruptcy. Shapiro shifted gears, moving from moral and national security questions to purely intellectual ones. His expression took on a pedantic, almost academic sharpness, signaling that he was about to provide an education whether Omar wanted it or not. Let us test your understanding of basic economics, Congresswoman, he began, because you are out here making economic policy for 330 million people, despite apparently not understanding how a balance sheet works. You were one of the loudest voices celebrating when you helped kill the Amazon HQ2 deal in New York. So, pop quiz, what exactly is a tax incentive? Omar blinked, adjusting her microphone, and began to say that a tax incentive is when the government gives corporations money. Stop! Shapiro held up his hand, cutting her off instantly. You have already failed the quiz. The government does not give anything in a tax incentive. Let me explain how this actually works for the people at home, and you might want to take notes because this is important. He pulled up a simple, high-contrast diagram on the screen. A tax incentive means a company pays less in taxes than they otherwise would. It is not money the government currently possesses. It is not cash sitting in a bank account. It is future revenue that the government agrees not to collect in exchange for massive economic activity. If the company does not come, that revenue does not exist. It is zero, nothing. If the company does come with incentives, the government gets some revenue, and some is more than zero. This is basic math. Shapiro pulled up the specific numbers from the Amazon deal. Amazon HQ2 in New York meant 25,000 to 40,000 jobs with an average salary of $150,000 and $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years. You celebrated killing this. You said, and I quote, "We saved $3 billion. Let us check your math." He started writing on the digital whiteboard. If Amazon does not come, the tax revenue from those 25,000 jobs is zero. The corporate tax from Amazon is zero. The local economic activity is zero. Total benefit to New York is zero. Now, if Amazon comes with those $3 billion in incentives, the income tax revenue alone from 25,000 jobs paying $150,000 is approximately $400 million per year. Over 10 years, that is $4 billion in income tax revenue for the city and state. So, Shapiro continued looking at Omar, New York agrees to not collect $3 billion in order to gain $4 billion in income taxes. That is a net gain of $1 billion. But wait, Amazon also pays corporate taxes, property taxes, and those 25,000 employees spend money in the local economy generating sales tax. Total new revenue for New York was estimated at $8 billion. But you told the public you saved $3 billion. You did not save a dime. That $3 billion never existed. It was a discount on a bill that now will never be sent. By killing the deal, you cost New York $8 billion in revenue. You did not save money. You set a pile of potential billions on fire because you do not understand the difference between not collecting future money and spending current money. He clicked through more analysis. Economists across the political spectrum, left, right, and independent, all agreed this was a massive net positive for New York. But let us talk about the people, not the numbers. 25,000 jobs with a $150,000 average salary are not just corporate executives. Those are programmers, HR staff, security guards, cafeteria workers, and administrators. Those are middle-class jobs that support families. You killed 25,000 opportunities for working people because you thought a tax incentive was a check being written to Jeff Bezos. That is not just wrong, Congresswoman. That is dangerous economic illiteracy in a position of power. You are using words like welfare and incentive interchangeably, and it is costing the American people their livelihoods. Shapiro pulled up what looked like a budget breakdown on steroids, a wall of numbers, calculations, and devastating projections that made the audience collectively wince. "Let us discuss your actual policy proposals," he said, his voice taking on a clinical, analytical edge. "I am going to present them, explain what they would actually do using real arithmetic, and then ask you to defend the math. This should be fun for me, definitely not for you." He clicked through the slides with rhythmic precision. Medicare for all. You co-sponsored it. The estimated cost, according to the Urban Institute, is $32 trillion over 10 years. Currently, total federal revenue is approximately $4.5 trillion per year, which equals $45 trillion over a decade. That means Medicare for all alone would consume 71% of all federal revenue. That leaves exactly 29% for everything else: defense, Social Security, infrastructure, and the very existence of the government. But we are just getting started. Shapiro did not pause for a breath. The Green New Deal. You co-sponsored that too. Cost estimate by the American Action Forum is $93 trillion over 10 years. Let us add those together. 32 plus 93 equals $125 trillion. Your projected federal revenue is $45 trillion. You are proposing to spend $125 trillion when you only have $45 trillion. You are short $80 trillion. He started calculating on the screen, his fingers flying. Let us see if we can find that $80 trillion. Shall we? Total wealth of all American billionaires combined is approximately 4.5 trillion. Confiscate every single penny of it, make them all destitute, seize their assets, take everything, and you have funded your proposals for approximately 4 months. Then what? Tax corporations? Total corporate profits are approximately $2 trillion per year. Tax them at 100%. Put every corporation in America out of business. Crash the stock market and end the private sector. And you get $20 trillion over 10 years. You are still $60 trillion short. Shapiro pulled up more analysis, shifting from the cost to the consequences. But let us talk about what your proposals would actually do to people. Medicare for All eliminates private insurance. That means 150 million Americans lose their current coverage. Healthcare costs do not decrease. They are just paid by the government instead of private entities. And quality decreases because government-run systems always reduce quality and increase wait times. Just ask anyone in the UK or Canada. Then there is defund the police. You supported this. Minneapolis, your own district, implemented it. The result was that crime increased 40%. Murders are up, assaults are up, property crime is up, businesses are leaving, and people are fleeing. The victims are overwhelmingly the minority communities you claim to represent. So your policy literally hurt them. He was on a roll now, the momentum building. Open borders, you support abolishing ICE and decriminalizing all illegal border crossings. The cost of illegal immigration, according to FAIR, is approximately $100 billion per year in health care, education, and social services. You want to increase that cost while making it easier to enter. Free college costs approximately $80 billion per year. Who benefits? Mostly middle and upper middle class students. Who pays? Everyone through taxes. You are proposing a massive transfer of wealth from working class people who did not go to college to relatively privileged students who did. The same goes for student loan forgiveness of $1.7 trillion. You are asking a plumber in Ohio to pay for the graduate degree of a lawyer in D.C. That is not progressive. It is regressive. Shapiro turned to face Omar, his expression one of sharp disbelief. Every policy you support has the same 3 problems: massive cost, zero funding mechanism, and disastrous outcomes. You have proposed policies costing $125 trillion when the revenue is $45 trillion. Even if you taxed every billionaire and every corporation out of existence, you are still $60 trillion short. Your proposals are not ambitious, Congresswoman. They are mathematically impossible fairy tales. They are economic fantasies that would bankrupt the country in a matter of months. Omar tried to respond, her voice strained, stating, "We have to be ambitious about transforming our economy to work for everyone." "Ambitious does not mean impossible," Shapiro shouted, finally letting his volume match his speed. "Ambitious does not mean ignoring basic arithmetic. You can be as ambitious as you want, but you still have to fund your proposals with actual money that actually exists. You cannot just wave a magic wand and make $80 trillion appear out of thin air. And when your policies are actually implemented, like defund the police, people die, crime increases, and communities suffer. These are not just bad ideas. They are dangerous delusions dressed up as policy, and the math shows they are a total fiction. Shapiro stood up, gathering every document, spreadsheet, and chart he had used throughout the debate, and stacked them into a single imposing pile on the lectern. This was the moment of total synthesis. The comprehensive destruction of Ilhan Omar's career delivered at maximum speed. "Let us review your career, Congresswoman," he said. his voice reaching a crescendo of intensity. I am going to speak quickly because there is a lot to cover, and almost all of it is terrible, so pay attention. Marriage fraud, Shapiro began, the words hitting like hammer blows. You married Ahmed Elmi under highly suspicious circumstances, suggesting immigration fraud. You lived at separate addresses, your children were listed at his residence, you had joint accounts, and you filed false tax returns with Ahmed Hersi while still legally married to Elmi. You have refused DNA testing that would settle the matter instantly. The statistical probability of this being an innocent coincidence is effectively zero. That is immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury, multiple federal felonies. He did not slow down for a second. Family enrichment. You paid Tim Mynette's company $2.7 million for services worth roughly $300,000. That is a $2.4 million overpayment to a man you were romantically involved with and eventually married. That is a campaign fund conversion to personal benefit. That is corruption quantified. Anti-Semitism. You have invoked tropes of hypnosis and money control, compared Israel to the Taliban, minimized terrorism against Jews, and opposed defensive systems that protect civilians. Your rhetoric correlates with spikes in anti-Semitic violence, and members of your own party have condemned you. That is not policy criticism, it is blatant bigotry. Shapiro was accelerating now, his voice filled with an edge of moral indignation. Foreign loyalty. You said Somali first, American third. You have consistently voted for Somali interests over American ones, met with their officials before our own State Department, and received donations from Somali-connected individuals while advocating for their government's positions. That is a violation of your oath. 9/11. 9/11. Minimization. You called the worst terrorist attack in our history. Some people did something while speaking for an organization with documented terror links. You have never truly apologized to the first responders or the families who felt stabbed by your words. That is moral bankruptcy. Economic illiteracy, he continued, gesturing toward the spreadsheets. You killed 25,000 jobs in New York because you do not understand how tax incentives work. You have proposed $125 trillion in spending with only $45 trillion in revenue. You are $80 trillion short of reality. Your policies, when implemented, increase crime and hurt the very communities you claim to represent. That is dangerous ignorance in a position of power. Ethics violations. You have been fined by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, investigated for misusing funds, and potentially violated FARA regulations. You have enriched your family, violated rules, and faced minimal consequences because you hide behind identity politics every time someone presents the facts. Shapiro looked directly at Omar, who sat in stunned silence. Here is your career in summary. America took you in as a refugee. It gave you safety, opportunity, and power. You responded by potentially committing immigration fraud, enriching your family with donor money, using anti-Semitic rhetoric, and saying America comes third in your loyalties. You have minimized terrorism, killed jobs through ignorance, and proposed impossible policies that would destroy the economy. You have weaponized identity to shield yourself from accountability and used victimhood to deflect from corruption. You have taken everything America gave you and spat in its face. He looked at the camera for his final statement. The facts do not care about your feelings, Congresswoman. They do not care about your identity. The facts show potential felonies, family corruption, bigotry, and a betrayal of your oath. You had every advantage this country could give, and you squandered it on destruction and self-interest. The American people deserve better than you, and the data proves it beyond any reasonable doubt." The room sat in an absolute heavy silence as Shapiro sat back down. Omar looked like she had been hit by an intellectual freight train traveling at 200 words per minute. Within 72 hours, the debate had accumulated over 150 million views. 73% of viewers, including a significant portion of independents and Democrats, admitted Shapiro had won decisively. Within weeks, the House Ethics Committee and the FBI confirmed they were reviewing the evidence presented on national television. A primary challenger emerged, a Somali-American veteran running on America First, and 6 months later, Omar lost her seat by 23 points. Her career was built on the sand of identity politics, and it took Ben Shapiro 2 hours to wash it away with the tide of facts. The room sat in a stunned, heavy silence that the CNN studio cameras captured with clinical precision. Omar looked like she had been hit by an intellectual freight train traveling at 200 words per minute. Her face pale, and her hands gripped tight against the edge of the lectern. Tapper looked as though he needed a stiff drink, while the audience was collectively processing a level of destruction rarely seen in televised politics. Ben Shapiro had just delivered the most comprehensive, evidence-backed dismantling of a political figure in modern American history. And he had done it at a pace that made it impossible for Omar to interrupt, deflect, or escape into her usual narratives. The fallout was immediate. The video of the debate went viral so fast that YouTube's servers briefly struggled to handle the traffic. Within 72 hours, it had accumulated over 150 million views across all platforms, not just short clips, but the full grueling 2-hour debate. People were mesmerized by the sheer volume of receipts. CNN's post-debate poll showed a staggering 73% of respondents believed Shapiro had won decisively. This was not just a partisan split, as independents favored Shapiro by a margin of 68 to 32, and even 42% of Democrats admitted that Shapiro's factual presentation was stronger than Omar's emotional defense. Liberal commentators tried to spin the defeat, complaining that Shapiro's pace was gish-galloping, overwhelming her with too many arguments to address. But that criticism fell flat when analysts pointed out that every single claim Shapiro made was backed by actual documents. It was not just quantity, it was quantity with devastating quality. Even the Washington Post's fact-check had to concede that Shapiro's claims about Omar's marriages, campaign payments, and policy positions were largely accurate. In Omar's own district, the impact was catastrophic. Within 48 hours, thousands of protesters, including many Somali Americans who had supported her for years, gathered outside her Minneapolis office. Their signs did not speak of identity. They spoke of the facts Shapiro had unearthed. Where did the $2.7 million go? And America First, Somalia Second. A prominent Somali community leader gave an emotional interview stating, "We supported her because we thought she represented us, but we did not know about the money to her family, or her saying America comes third. We came here to be Americans." The institutional walls began to close in shortly after. The House Ethics Committee, which had been sitting on complaints for years, suddenly announced a comprehensive investigation citing that the evidence was now too public to ignore. More significantly, the FBI confirmed they were reviewing allegations regarding potential immigration and tax fraud. Shapiro had essentially built a prosecutorial case file on national television, and law enforcement could no longer look away. A primary challenger emerged within days, a Somali-American Democrat who had served in the military and taken the same oath Omar had, but who ran on a simple platform of America first always. The polls were devastating. Omar's approval rating collapsed to 38%. Her fellow squad members, AOC and Rashida Tlaib, were conspicuously silent, realizing that being associated with Omar after Shapiro's evisceration was political poison. The speaking fees and university invitations vanished overnight. Tim Mynette's company, the E Street Group, shut down within 3 months once the $2.4 million in overpayments became a matter of national debate. The primary election 6 months later was not even close, and Omar lost by 23 points in a district she had once dominated. In her bitter concession speech, she blamed the usual specters of racism and Islamophobia, but she never acknowledged what Shapiro had documented, that her career had ended because her conduct was indefensible. Shapiro, when asked about it on his podcast, was characteristically direct. "I did not end her career. Her conduct ended her career. I just made sure people saw the facts." If presenting evidence at 200 words per minute destroys your career, maybe your career was built on a lie.